Now that we have looked at how receptive skills should be taught, it's time for us to move on to productive skills. Much like receptive skills, productive skills also have their own basic methodological model for teaching productive skills. Even though writing and speaking are different in many ways, we can still follow a basic approach to teach both skills effectively. We start off with the lead-in stage. The first step is to engage your students with the topic. You might ask them what they already know about the subject. For example, if you are going to have a debate on a topic of tourism, for example, ask them about their experiences with it. Or if you're doing a role play about checking in at an airport, get them thinking about the typical conversations that happen when people check in. The goal is to get them ready and be interested in the task that you are about to have them do in the later stage. The second stage is where you set the task. Explain exactly what students will be doing. Make sure that they understand the task fully. If necessary, demonstrate the activity to them. For example, if students will be working in pairs, you can show them how the task works by doing a mock example in front of the class. You can even ask students to repeat the instructions to make sure that they understood what you have just told them to do. And don't forget to provide any materials or resources, plenty enough that they'll need, like role-play cards for a role-play, for example. The goal here is to make sure that they know exactly what to do, have everything they need in order to do it before they even begin to do it. It doesn't matter if you're teaching writing or speaking. And your model or your sample of the task can be a really good guide for them. The third stage is where you, as a teacher, monitor the task. So as students begin the task, it is important that you as a teacher walk around the class. Don't just stand still in the middle of, in front of the board. Walk around the class, monitor what they're doing, listen to what they're saying or writing, and provide help if they face any difficulties. For writing tasks, you might actively get involved by responding to their work, offering guidance and helping them move forward if they are stuck, if you see that they are stuck. The next stage, the fourth stage, is feedback session. So once the task is done, they have to give their output to the class. And then it's time for you to give feedback. So for productive skills, it is important that you focus on the content of what the students did, not just the language that they used. You want to highlight what they did really well and provide constructive feedback on areas that they need improvement on. The idea here is not to be negative. It is to be positive and supportive rather than focusing only on their mistakes. You don't want to focus solely on the grammatical mistakes that they make in their writing or speaking. You want to focus on the content, the actual content that they put out. Okay? The last stage is where you give them a task-related follow-up. So after the feedback session, you may want to move on to a follow-up activity. This could be a discussion or a similar task that allows students to build on what they have just practiced. Often it is useful to reset the task or something similar to it and let students go through the process one more time. This helps reinforce what they've learned and boosts their confidence if they have to do the same task twice. They know exactly what to do, what we want them to do. This is a simple, structured approach to teaching productive skills. So by following these steps, you'll ensure that your students are actively engaged and making steady progress in both speaking and writing. And you as a teacher know exactly what to do at the beginning, in the middle, and at the end. When teaching speaking or writing, it is important that we don't forget about structuring discourse, which is basically how we organize and arrange ideas or information, and that students should know about it, or at least when we teach the skills, we have to teach with it in mind. When we are teaching writing and speaking, one of the most important things is helping students structure their discourse in a way that makes sense to the listeners or readers. So, whether it's in writing or speaking, structure is key for successful communication. So, what do I mean by it? In writing, to make your ideas clear, we need what we call coherence and cohesion. Coherent writing means that the ideas are logical and they follow a clear sequence. When you write an essay, for example, it is important that each paragraph flows smoothly into the next so that the readers can follow your argument or story without getting lost. Cohesion, on the other hand, involves connecting these ideas through words or phrases, like using pronouns, repetition, or synonyms to refer back to the ideas that you've already mentioned. You can also use linking words like however, therefore, or then to show how different ideas relate to each other. This makes your writing more connected and easier for the reader to understand. The next one is what we call conversation discourse. In speaking, structure is just as important. Conversations are more spontaneous and can sometimes feel very chaotic. But successful communication still relies on having a clear flow of ideas. For example, when you're speaking, it is important to know how to take turns and use language that helps keep the conversation flow and on track. You can use organizing markers or discourses like firstly, secondly, or and as if that wasn't enough to guide your listeners through your ideas. These phrases not only help you stay organized, but also help your listeners follow what you're saying. Last but not least is the effective communication. One difference between writing and speaking is that spoken language often uses more formulaic phrases. Things like, let me think, you see, that give speakers time to process their thoughts or make conversation feel more natural. These types of expressions are important for making your spoken language flow smoothly, just like cohesive devices we use in writing. So why do we need to know all of this? That's because teaching students to use these structures in both writing and speaking helps them communicate more effectively. It is about knowing how to organize ideas, connect them clearly, and use appropriate phrases to make their communication easier to follow. So this knowledge will help them in all sorts of situations, whether they are writing a report or having a conversation or giving a presentation. When teaching productive skills, it is essential that we think about the interaction we have with the interlocutors or the conversation partners or even our readers. When we speak or write, we often need to change how we communicate depending on who we are talking to and how they are reacting to us. This is called interacting with an audience. Whether we are speaking to a large group or writing an email, we adjust our style and content to make sure that our message is clear and effective for that particular audience. For example, a lecturer or a speaker will change their pace, repeat important information, or add new information based on how the audience is responding. If the audience looks confused or bored, they might slow down or explain things a little bit differently. When writing, especially in emails or letters, we also adapt our communication based on how the person we're writing to responds. If the person seems confused or asks for more information, we might provide more details in the next message. In everyday conversations, we are always paying attention to how the other person is reacting, and we adjust what we say based on their responses. So this helps ensure that our message is clear and that we communicate effectively. In the classroom, teaching students how to notice these reactions and adjust their communication style can help them become better speakers and writers. It is about being flexible and responsive to your audience, and whether in spoken or written form. So as a teachers, as you teach productive and productive skills, kind of drag their attention to the fact that their audience, who they're talking to, who they're writing to, is also important. Teaching speaking and writing also has underlying difficulties. Again, it is not just about knowing how to teach alone that teachers have to worry about, but the fact that other difficulties that don't really associate with the teaching itself that occur. When we speak or write in a language, we might sometimes get stuck or not know a word or just forget it. This can happen in both our own language and in a foreign language. But there are different strategies we can use in order to deal with these situations. The first one is what we call improvising. This means that we can try to say something else differently even though we know or we're not sure that it's not exactly right. Sometimes this works, but it can make our message a little bit unclear as we are not even sure what we are saying. The second strategy is discarding. Sometimes if we cannot find the right word to say, just don't say it at all. But this could also prove to be problematic, as it could mean leaving an idea unfinished or not explaining things to people at all. The next one is foreignizing. For example, let's imagine a Khmer speaker who doesn't know the English word for the word computer, right? And he or she tries to use the Khmer equivalent of the word computer, as in computer, but they say it like the English word computer. They might pronounce something like computer, thinking the listener will understand because it kind of sounds very similar to the actual English word computer, but they don't know the word, so they replace the word with another word in Khmer because it sounds similar to the English word. That's what it is. This kind of strategy can sometimes work, especially if the listener knows the language too, and the word is close enough to the foreign word, but it might confuse someone who isn't familiar with the Khmer word computer, right? So yeah, that could be proved problematic as well. Paraphrasing. When we don't know the word, we might explain the idea in another way. For example, instead of saying toothbrush, we might say something for cleaning my teeth. Do you have something that I can use to clean my teeth? Instead of saying, do you have a toothbrush? Because you don't know the word toothbrush. So you paraphrase the word toothbrush by breaking it down into an actual description of a toothbrush. Okay? Something like that. So as teachers, we should encourage students to use strategies like paraphrasing or improvising because these can be really helpful in certain cases, of course. It's important to practice these strategies in class so that students can get better at communicating, even if they face these kinds of challenges. Besides the difficulties mentioned in teaching and learning productive skills, there are other issues regarding the language itself that may hinder the flow of the teaching and students' learning. When teaching students to speak or write in English, they often face some challenges, especially when they, can't find the right words, which can be frustrating, particularly in speaking where they can't really look up words on the spot, If a student cannot think of the word restaurant, for example, they might say something else, like a place where you eat. They paraphrase it. If they don't remember the word for library, they might try to say, something like place where you can read books, or even use a word from their native language to replace the actual word in English, which can be, quite frustrating, right? As a speaker, as a communicator, you want to say something, but you can't find the right word to describe that. So, what can we do as teachers to help? The first solution is to use what we call supply key language. So in class, before before a task, let's say before you ask them to work on a speaking task, we can teach students useful phrases or vocabulary that they'll be using in that task. For example, if they are going to talk about travel, we might teach them phrases like, I would like to visit blah, 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 so that they can supply their own noun. Or how much does it cost, right? A place to ask for price. So this gives them the language they need in order to get started. But keep in mind though, no language often isn't available for instant use. So give them time to practice the phrases first. The second one is to plan activities in advance. So to make sure that they can use the language fluently in your class, we should plan activities that encourage them to use language they've already learned. For example, if they're learning food vocabulary, we can set up a role play where they order food at a restaurant, right? This helps them feel more confident when they need to use the language in a real conversation. That's because they've already been exposed to the language, they've already used some of these phrases, so when you ask them to create a conversation, for example, they know exactly what to say or what to use. By using these strategies, we can help students feel more comfortable and confident in their speaking and writing, even if they encounter language challenges. In teaching in general, especially if you want your students to improve their productive skills, you may want to assign what we call projects to them. That is, longer-term projects that extend beyond a single lesson. These projects give students the opportunity to dive deeper into a topic and produce more comprehensive work. For example, they might create booklets about indigenous people, or write cookbooks on ancient civilizations like the Egyptians, or they may be asked to do a research on animals or their natural habitats. These projects are ideal for integrating multiple skills together. Students will typically use various resources such as books or websites or videos online, or even conduct mini experiments to gather information. This encourages them to practice not just writing, but also speaking and presenting their findings once they've done their projects, their research. What sets these projects apart from shorter tasks that we do in class every day, activities like preparing for debate or writing a review involve some research and planning. Project depths structure their work and often present it in creative ways. This makes project work a valuable tool for promoting skill integration, critical thinking, and independent learning. So basically, it's pretty much about branching out, okay? Branching out from what we do in class every day, where we make use of shorter tasks that we ask them to spend a couple minutes to do, and then they have to give their output. These projects are long-term. So they have time to do research, to use their skills, writing, listening, reading, to do research on their specific topics. So let's say that you decide to give students a project to do to enhance their productive skills outside of the class. Since it is long-term, you may need to know how to manage such a project. So the project starts with choosing a topic. This could be a topic suggested by you or chosen by the students themselves, or maybe a combination of both. For example, students might decide to create a brochure on local landmarks. During the briefing, teacher explains the goals, how to gather data, the timeline, or maybe any valuable available support that you might provide to them. After briefing, the student starts brainstorming ideas. If the project is teacher-directed, the teacher might guide them on what to research or where to do research. For instance, students might gather information on the history of landmarks that they chose. So after brainstorming, they have to gather data. Students gather information from books, the internet, or by interviewing people. For example, they might visit a website or use library resources to learn more about the landmarks' history. After gathering data, they have to plan. So once students have gathered their data, they create a plan for the project. If it's a written project, they might outline the sections of their brochure. If it is a presentation, they'll plan the key points that they will discuss in their presentation. And then they have to start drafting and editing. Students create a first draft of the project. This might be a brochure, a report, or a slideshow. They share it with peers for feedback and make edits necessary. For example, students might write an initial draft of their brochure, then revise it based on their peer feedback or teachers' feedback. The next one is the result. The final step is the presentation of the completed project. This could be a written report, a presentation, or a video. Students might present their brochures in front of the class, explaining the landmarks to the students. Last but not least is the consultation and tutorial. Throughout the project, the teacher acts as a guide, checking on the progress and help students learn, provide any necessary support. For example, the teacher might help a student narrow down the focus of their research if it becomes too broad. So by breaking down the project into these manageable steps, students can work through the project more effectively, integrating their reading, writing, speaking skills at the same time.